This is part 4 of Sweet Baby. So far, we've flooded a milky baby bottle, piped lines on some warm winter jammies, and painted with sterling pearl to make a shimmering bib. Today I show you how I make a really neat swirly twirly pattern and what goes into making the Sweet Baby colors. Piping the outline on a circle can be a bit tricky, but to out-trick the tricky, I pull my piping bag up quite a bit off of the surface, sometimes up to about an inch, depending on how big my curve is. Somehow, this allows me to have more control over my line, and to be quite honest, it's a really satisfying process. As with all of the other cookies in this series, I am using a 1 consistency outline and flood for this wet on wet. Though I usually struggle to achieve a perfect wet on wet because it wants to crust up on me so quickly, I am hopeful today because this circle is only 2 inches in diameter, which allows me more time to get it all done. Of the 5 designs in this series, I was most looking forward to this one, and I wasn't disappointed. I couldn't figure out how to effectively draw out the swirly twirly part on paper, but I'm very clear on what I want to accomplish. To have the best results with wet on wet, I try to get my flood icings as equal a consistency as I can. If the icings are both about the same, they very nicely melt together without my having to waste any time messing with them to get them to settle. For this design to be as chunky a look as I want, I decided to use my thicker scribe for the swirl. When I tried it with my thin PME scribe, I didn't like the daintiness of the effect. Also, notice around the edges, the icing is already starting to crust up. Though I'm prone to exaggeration in my descriptions, I was not exaggerating about my time constraints with wet on wet. My thin scribe is very effective at helping me to settle out the slightly crusted parts. Again, you can see here just how high I pull my bag up from the surface of the cookie. And because I'm using only this 1 consistency, I immediately go right into flooding. I thought it would be a really nice balance to have the bottom circle just be a plain, solid red dot. I was able to make the exact red I was hoping for, but it didn't start off perfect. I'll show you in a minute what I did. But first I want to show you the blue version of this swirly twirly rattle. Let me know in the comments if the words swirly twirly trigger something in your mind. It is so cool to me that we can use straight lines to achieve this look. Now for these beautiful colors. I made my red base a week ago by using the Rose Red Master Elite powder from the Sugar Art. Once I had it all mixed up, I put it into these 8-ounce deli containers I purchased on Amazon, placed a bit of plastic wrap on top to thwart the efforts of the air to crust any of my surface, and tossed it into my freezer to develop until I had time to decorate my cookies. Today I pulled them out of my freezer and let them sit for maybe half an hour on my counter, and they are now ready to work with. This is a beautiful red all on its own, but it isn't quite the color I'm going for. It's a bit bright. You might be wondering about the bag of dark icing I have on my counter. This is leftover burgundy icing from making Cozy Fall. I don't like to waste, so I always put a tiny binder clip on the end of my bags and throw them in the freezer until needed again. Since I'm adding icing that is already fully developed, I don't believe I'm in any danger of the icing changing colors on me, with the exception that as it dries on my cookie, the the color always deepens just a bit more. I'm not sure how much of my burgundy it'll take to move the meter, so to speak, so I add in small increments until, lo and behold, I have used all of it. If you would like to see how I use the Master Elites to color my icing, I've linked the episode Making Cozy Scarf in the description below. Since my base red icing is the thicker stuff that is straight from my mixer with only the color added, I intentionally used only my leftover medium peak icing so that it doesn't thin out my icing to a consistency that is looser than what I need for this series. It is possible to thicken up the icing a bit using either powdered sugar or meringue powder, but since I had the thicker icing, I used it first. To bring some cohesion to the undertone of my colors, I add a small amount of blue to my red icing and vice versa. This blue was made using the Master Elite powder in Blueberry. The final red is a mix of red rose and burgundy. Now that it's all mixed up, time to bag the icing. I bring out my tall glass that holds my bag open and my scale to measure out an amount that is comfortable for my hands. My piping bags are just the cheapy ones you can order on Amazon. I haven't had one burst on me yet. I already know that this icing is what I'm looking for in a soft peak, so I add about 3 ounces into my bag. Wipe off that blob so that later on it doesn't dry and send crusty flakes all over my table. Helicopter the bag to get the icing all the way down to the tip, and help to remove air bubbles from the icing, which for some reason did not work well for me this time, as you can see in part 2, making sweet baby jammies. Tie a knot in my bag and cut off the extra. To get my flood consistency, I add water to the icing with my dropper in small increments. Mix it in completely. Check how it acts when I lift up my spatula and decide if it's right. This usually requires several additions to get it to my desired consistency. Today, it takes me 4 tries to get the icing to flow nicely off my spatula in a nice steady stream, no globbing. Now, into the bag. I love watching the cascade of icing. After I cut the extra off of the bag, I always add a colored rubber band so that I can easily identify my flood icing. For my white icing, I also use the Master Elite powder, which not only brightens my white, but also helps me to avoid color bleed. I've let my icing crust over for a while, and now with my soft peak white icing, I pressure pipe a beaded handle. Then, after letting it sit for just a couple of minutes, I add a bow using the same icing. In my original design, I intended to paint the handle of this red rattle gold and the blue rattle silver. But alas, I had to change the plan after finding out my gold wasn't exactly gold. If you haven't already seen it, I recommend watching part 3 to learn all about that lovely discovery. All said and done, I do have to say that I think for this rattle, I would have preferred to just leave the handle white versus using the silver, since the gold wasn't an option. Just yesterday, I ordered some actual gold luster dust on Amazon, so be on the lookout in our next series, Very Merry, for gold painting to appear. You're so funny. I do, however, stop talking.
Be silent.
Not doing a good job. Anything that you do silently that makes me make noise is not you being silent.
That is, yes it is.
That's not how that works.
That's how that works.
I do, however, really like how the silver turned out on the blue rattle. See you next time.
Next time on Kuny's Cookie Chronicles.
This is the final part of Sweet Baby. Today, I break out the ruler, use a piping tip in an unconventional way, and fancify our Sweet Baby carriage with silver paint.